Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of the Monster of Montmartre. We are off to Paris. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! I will do my best not to slaughter the French accent, but it's fun. Oh oui, 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 mon chéri. This story is also known as the Grim Reaper of Paris. Nice. And before we get into it, I just wanted to apologise because I skipped last week. Guess what? The dog and I had matching ear infections. That's random, isn't it? And I had my youngest son was poorly. Do excuse me as well because I'm still feeling a little under the weather. I will do my best. Gin will help. Let's begin. Our story begins in 1984 and it begins with a woman named Anna. She was 83 years old and on the 6th of October, her family went round to her place to see if she was okay, to check in on her. Excuse me. It's all going on. What they found was not what they expected, and actually it was obvious that the place had been burgled. To what extent they didn't know at that point, but poor Anna. There is a slight thing I want to mention about this case, which is all of the victims in this case, and there are lots of them, all of them are elderly people. So it is upsetting. It is upsetting. If it is something that you do not fancy listening to, please go away, turn it off, go to another video, or just go and have a cup of tea, think about fluffy bunnies, and see me next week with another one. First time I've had to do like a little disclaimer. Oh my god, am I a YouTuber? Mm-hmm. Poor Anna was found and she was covered in blood and she had been murdered the night before. When they did Anna's autopsy, what they found was that although she had been really severely beaten, hence all of the blood, her cause of death was actually suffocation, and she was found with a pillow nearby next to her, so they believed that that was the murder weapon. The police, at first, their first suspicions were that this was a robbery gone wrong, and it tragically, because the robber had only gotten away with the equivalent of £30, which is about $50, so not a lot. So it just felt like a real tragic crime. That day, while the police were investigating Anna's murder, a phone call was received and a similar incident was reported. 91-year-old Germaine Petito, she had been attacked the same night in her own place and incredibly badly beaten. She was lucky to be alive, basically. And the same thing. So her place had been turned upside down and literally about £30, $50 had been stolen. So again, like a small amount of money and just a hell of a lot of rage. And it seemed like the person had tried to kill her. So the police were connecting these two cases together very quickly because it's like basically the same MO. What the police had now, though, was a living witness. They suspected that the attacker believed that he had killed Germaine. So he probably didn't even know that she was alive, but she was. So this is like a witness that's seen the attacker. Hello, like that's amazing. However, 91 years old, Germaine was she was traumatised by this event. It was just awful, as you can imagine. And she tried her very, very best to help the police. So sweet. She did try, but she just couldn't. And in the end, Germaine would actually stop answering the phone and stop talking to the police because it was just really affecting her incredibly badly. I think she just wanted to move on and she just couldn't handle it. I mean, 91, that's really, really old. And yeah, the poor love, she just couldn't cope with the questions. And she also didn't want to relive the situation, which you would have to do in order to give a description and things like that. So poor Germaine, she stopped talking to the police. 4 days later, 4 days, not long, an apartment building in the same area. All of these things were in the same area. So Anna and Jermaine, they lived really close together. And then this apartment building, it was close as well. And that it was set on fire. So there was this big raging apartment building fire. But it was not all as it seemed. When the fire was out and they were looking through the building, they actually found a body. But this body had not been killed by the fire. Oh no. This body seemed to be the victim of another one of these attacks. It's only 4 days later. Have you watched Criminal Minds? I used to watch it a lot, and I must admit, I watched it possibly too much because I used to have nightmares and stuff, so I had to stop watching it as much, but I loved it. Reed, oh, my actual. Oh, take me away. I love him. Anyway, distracted by the thought of Reed. What was my point? What they used to say in that all the time was that, that they were speeding up, and all the psychology. I love that, the psychology behind these killers, these serial killers. So it's quite a quick, 2 people, very quick succession, and then 4 days later, somebody else. So yeah, I can't remember the term that they used. If you can remember, put it in the comments because it's going to drive me nuts. I might have to watch an episode now. Ooh. 89-year-old Suzanne was the woman that they found in the burnt apartment building. She had been suffocated, and the bag was still with a plastic bag, and it was still on her head. So that confused me somewhat because it was believed that the attacker had tried to, I guess, burn the evidence, like burn the building or burn the apartment so that nobody would know what had really happened. I don't know, but it didn't do, I don't know, did he have visions of it completely, everything being incinerated? Because that was not the case. So they found poor Suzanne with the bag still on her head. I'm not sure about that, hiding evidence, because he hadn't done it before. Anyway, the police believed that the attacker had tried to cover his tracks by setting the apartment building on fire. That was the consensus. The police linked all 3 of these attacks, murders and attempted murder all together. And they were incredibly worried because, like I said, this is all happening very thick and fast and escalating. Is that what it is? Oh, he's escalating. That's what the word I think I was looking for. This guy didn't really seem to be escalating. He seemed to just be full on in there, like at peak. 1 month later. So actually, he took a bit of a break. Small one. A month later, there was another victim, Iona. She was a retired teacher. She was 71 years old, and she had been bound with electrical wire, and this time she had been beaten to death. Similar situation, a very small amount of money had been taken from her apartment. 2 days later, picking up the pace, escalating. Another victim, 84-year-old Alice. Similar to Anna, the following day, her son went round to check in on her and see her. It's just awful that their families are finding them, although, oh God. Anyway, so he goes to check on her and he finds poor Alice. Again, she has been beaten to death. She's had a small amount of money stolen. And this time, right, this is grim, excuse you, cover your ears, I'll put a thingy on. This time, poor Alice had been forced to drink drain cleaner. This did concern the police because this time it was pretty obvious that this wasn't just robberies being interrupted, because this would suggest that he was getting pleasure out of the killing of these women. Sicko. Well, and torture, that's torture, isn't it? Can you believe it? The next day, the 5th victim would be found. So the next day. Her name was Mary Choi. She, again, same MO. This time she had some broken fingers. So it was like he was torturing his victims as well before he was killing them. This was confirmed with his next victim. She had been stabbed. Her cause of death was suffocation, but she had been stabbed. So he's using all different forms of torture now before he's actually killing his victims. And 3 days later, you won't believe this, or maybe you will. 3 days later, 2 victims were found. So now he has murdered 2 people in the same night. So it's a double murder. But they weren't in the same place. They weren't in the same building or apartment or house or anything. No, they were separate. So that's escalation, isn't it? If ever you did hear of it. This was 77-year-old Paul and 82-year-old Jean. And they were both robbed for small amounts of money, and they were both suffocated. This is now 8 murders in a month. That's crazy. And as I'm talking about it, and as I'm like reading off the names and these horrific things that have happened, it kind of just, can you imagine that happening, like where you live? Whoa. That is crazy, isn't it? That's like out of a film. I say that often, but that this is like out of a film. The police must have just been, what the hell? And it terrified the community, because this community, this area, it was quite low income, and it was full of what's the word? Pensioners, like old age pensioners, and they are vulnerable and they are weaker, and it just feels like an easier target, doesn't it, for things like robbery? But it seems like this guy just he had a thirst for murder. No evidence. Well, I lie. 1 fingerprint in all of this shenanigans, these 8 murders. 1 fingerprint. He left 1 fingerprint behind. Not a lot of evidence to go on at all. Frustrating. So the police, like I said, they must have been getting annoyed, frustrated and worried. I mean, obviously, but I guess if you're a policeman, that's like a thrill of the job, isn't it? Like catching the bad guys. That's why you want to do it. So they wanted him. They wanted this guy. They wanted to catch him. And all they could think of was catching this guy in the act, because his downfall, I guess, is that he is operating in a really small area of Paris. And yeah, so what they did, which I kind of think, yeah, good. Well, it will have had 2 effects. Both are good. One would have been better, but one is that with a huge police force presence, so loads of bobbies on the beat, loads of them, just flood the area, just police on every street, every corner, day, night, The first would be that this guy would just stop, because it's not worth it and he's going to get caught. And the second, which would have been ideal, is that with that many police around, they were hoping that his thirst, because it does seem like he's quite hungry for murder, doesn't it? 8 in a month, 8 people in a month. So they were hoping that he would have a go and that they could catch him in the act, which is kind of dangerous, because what if they missed him? Yeah, I don't know. Cat and mouse, very cat and mouse. That was their plan. And it kind of worked, but not in the way that they wanted it to. The killing spree stopped. Now, in this case, they refer to the killings in waves. So this was the first wave, sadly. Yes, there are more. Sorry. Don't know if you heard that. That was literally my stomach. Went, pit. Pardon me. I do apologise. Paul made the most delicious roast dinner. It was so good. It's not a Sunday. What day is it? I don't even know. But it was so scrum. The chicken was going to go out of date, so I was just like, oh, we're having a roast dinner tonight. And I had to finish my assignment, so I have now finished those 2 assignments. Hallelujah. Done all of that. What's wrong with my nose? Imagine I had bogies. Would I even be able to put a video out if I had like literal bogies? I don't know, probably would. What was I saying? I've digressed again, sorry. I've just missed you so much. I feel like I need to catch you up on my life. What I had for dinner, basically. Have we talked about the weather yet? We will. Anyway, what was I saying? The police. So the case then, annoyingly, went cold. So even though it's great that he's stopped killing, thank you very much, they still don't have the guy. So with their one little fingerprint that they do have, a little tiny fingerprint, they go to, don't forget this is back in the day, 1984, before I was even born. They go off with their fingerprint and they go to all of the prisons in the local area, and they have to physically compare the fingerprint that they have with inmates that are currently in prison. Because the murders have stopped, they are thinking, is it because he was scared off by our presence? Probably, but there's a chance that he's in prison. You know, that he's been caught for something else or he's in prison. So they wanted to go, not a bad idea, take the fingerprint round and just see if it belonged to anyone in prison, basically. No. So it's not the same as it is now. There's no database back then. So they had to go and manually do it. What a task. But they did. But nothing came up. Over the course of a year, the case just went cold. There were no more killings. Nothing came of the fingerprint, and they slowly decreased the amount of police presence that was in that area. I mean, they have to. They can't just keep that up forever. But with that decrease, after about a year after the first wave, more killings would begin. This is frustrating. This time, not in the exact same area, it was about 20 minutes away, but the minute the first murder took place, the police knew that they were dealing with the same guy, the same attacker. The first victim of the second wave was 91-year-old Estelle, and she was suffocated and she was robbed, and it had the hallmarks of this guy all over it. 2 weeks later, again, he's coming straight back. 2 weeks later, it was 77-year-old Andre, exactly the same MO. And then 5 days after Andre, he murdered 83-year-old Yvonne. 3 days later, he committed another double murder, so 2 people in the same night again. The word, I need to get a thesaurus because brazen is the only word I can think of, but it's very brazen, isn't it? It's just like he's just going around terrorising these elderly people, and he's getting away with it. He got away with it there, now he's going to go here and do it again. It's like, you can't catch me. Oh, it's so frustrating. And 2 people in one evening, that is really worrying. It's just really worrying, isn't it? I just think, gives me chills. The fact that, I don't know, I just don't like that. No, thank you. 3 days after the double murder, he would commit another murder. This would be his 14th murder. All of these murders, all with the same MO, suffocation, beating, torture, and small amounts of money taken. And then concluding his second wave of victims. The final victim was a month later. So that's unusual, but there was a month gap in the first wave as well. But yeah, so there was this he had this heightened frenzy, and then he had a month-long gap, and then he murdered again. And exactly the same as the first wave, the police, they swooped in. They knew they did the same thing again. So they upped the police presence in the area, flooded the streets with police, and the same thing happened again. It had the same result. So the second wave ended. What are you going to do when there's police everywhere? So yeah, it did the same thing, and he stopped. The killings ended in February of 1986. By the summertime, in June, by then, they'd withdrawn quite a lot of the police presence, and what do you think happened then? Okay, yeah, he struck again. So he murdered somebody again. So the minute they pulled back, he did it again. Oh, sad times. It was the day after I was born. 14th of June, 1986. This time, the police were all over this shit. They're like, oh my God, no, not again. So they've just retreated, and then they're like, no. And the very next day, they flooded the streets again in that area, and they were just like, no. But I mean, how frustrating. That doesn't seem like this. You can't do that forever, can you? And when they don't do it, he's back with a vengeance. So it's a frustrating case. However, the killings did stop, but the police, what they did not know is that is because the killer was behind bars. He had been arrested for a different crime, for something else. Oh, frustrating. The old fingerprint thing, like if they had the fingerprint, I mean, coulda, shoulda, woulda, like they didn't, but if they had, and they couldn't have like just made technology any quicker, but if they'd have had the database, they had that fingerprint, he would have gone in and they would have been like, oh my God, it's you. And they would have had him. Frustrating, isn't it? Oh my God. A year and a half later, the attacker was released from prison, and he's just straight back to it, straight back to his old ways, and he's straight in there with, again, 2 attacks in one night. He's missed this. Horrible. 79-year-old Rachel and 87-year-old Bertha. Bertha survived. Bertha lived in an apartment building, so she wasn't in a house, she was in an apartment building, and she really went for it. She was screaming. And because of all of this screaming and commotion, her neighbours came to see what was going on, and they came to find her. This made him run. So he ran and he just left the premises. Now this was crucial to the investigation because Bertha had an incredibly clear view. Yeah, view. She'd seen the attacker. She'd seen him. That's what I mean to say. So she'd seen him and she knew what he looked like, and it was like, okay. And she could give a really clear description of this attacker to the police. Yes. This guy was different. He had hair like Carl Lewis. Bear with me because I had to Google who that was. I didn't know. But now I'll share some pictures, but I pieced it together. So he had hair like Carl Lewis at the time, which was really distinct. So good one. And he also had a left ear piercing, and that's quite distinguishing as well, isn't it? Is that the word? You know what I mean? Distinct. It's that. Bertha sat down with a sketch artist and made a composite sketch of this dude, and that composite sketch was plastered all over freaking Paris. Apparently it was just everywhere. Like everywhere you went, you saw this guy's face. Really frustratingly and tragically and sadly, on the very day that Bertha was giving her composite sketch, the killer would strike again. This would be his final murder, 73-year-old Genevieve. She was murdered in her own home and a small amount of money was taken. Now this I like. We're all like, oh, 4 days later this, 3 days later he did this, 1 day later, 2 people in one night. Well, listen to this. 4 days later, a police officer is strolling down the street. I think he's on duty. He's having a walk. He's in between whatever he's doing. I don't know. Maybe he's gone to get what do you eat? What do French policemen eat? It's not donuts, is it? Croissant. Oh, a croissant. Croissant? I don't know. Pain au chocolat? Stop it. Anyway, he's gone to grab himself a baguette with a bit of ham and cheese, a bit of brie. Oh, shush. Oh my God. Seriously. Stop it. All I want now is a brie baguette. Oh, camembert with like carrots and cucumber. I don't know if that's how they eat it over there. They probably just hunker it down with like half a baguette. But I like carrot sticks and cucumber sticks chopped up and then eat the camembert like that. Oh, stop it. Oh my God. Anyway, the policeman is walking down the road and he walks past this guy and he's, you know that moment when you're like, oh, I know you. You just think, oh my God, where do I know you from? Like that moment. And he suddenly realises, he's like, oh my God, hair like Carl Lewis, ear piercing, all of this. And he's like, you are the face that is plastered all around bloody Paris. It's you. Again, brazen. If your face is everywhere, what the hell are you doing going out? Going to the shops? No, go home. But no, he didn't. Thinks he's clever. So the police officer, he arrests him. Can you imagine that? That police officer must have just been like, yes. Oh, how good. Anyway, so he arrests him. This guy is 24-year-old. He's been busy. He's only 24. 24-year-old Thierry Paulin. I hope I'm saying that correctly. To be honest, I don't care if I'm not. When he was questioned, he was very much, this wasn't me, got the wrong person, all like this, protesting his innocence. But the police, they were really sure. Even more so when they realised that the times that he was serving in prison for armed robbery, assault, all of this business, were the times that the killings stopped. Oh, that's a spicy coincidence, isn't it? That was like, okay, yeah, we think we've got him, guys. So, who is this fella? He was born on the 28th of November in 1963 in Martinique, which is a Caribbean island, I believe. And I think it is it owned by France? I don't know. I'm not very good at geography, but I think so from what I read. That's where he lived. And his parents were incredibly young. They were both teenagers at the time, and they happened to be teenagers that were just not ready for this responsibility. It hit them hard, and they were incredibly overwhelmed, and they just couldn't handle having a baby. So what they did is Thierry's dad buggered off to France. He was so overwhelmed by this situation, by this baby and the whole thing, that he went to France. He left the country. And the mother, she was incredibly overwhelmed, and she couldn't look after a baby. So the baby, Thierry, he ended up with his grandmother, so his dad's mum. This situation was not a good one. It wasn't like she was a doting grandma that was so happy to have her grandson. No. She felt like this was a burden. It wasn't a loving relationship. She was not kind to Thierry. She was neglectful. When he was a bit older, he went to find his mum. She still lived in Martinique, or on Martinique. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she still lived there. And yes, she did take him in, and he did live with his mum. However, and this must be hard to swallow, his mum had a whole new family. So she had met somebody else, and he had stepbrothers and stepsisters, and she'd had more kids. So yeah, and he always felt like he was on the outside of everything. He never felt like part of their family. His behaviour, as you can imagine, was not good, and it just deteriorated over time. At one point, he took a knife to school and threatened a teacher, and nothing was really done about it. His mother didn't do anything about it. I don't think she knew what to do about anything. I don't even know if she knew all of what was going on at school. And eventually, when he started to be violent towards her other children, so his stepbrothers and sisters, she drew the line. And she was like, this cannot go on, you can't live here anymore. So she called his dad in France. And there was an agreement that Thierry could go and live with his dad over in France. She just had to put him on a plane. And then his dad was like, yeah, okay, I'll have him. Just seems like he was unwanted and abandoned. And it was made really clear that he wasn't wanted as well. Like, can you imagine what that does to you? Moving to France was not a happy affair either. Thierry was black, and as you can imagine, in the 1970s, racism, it was huge, and he didn't have hardly any friends at school because of that, and he just kind of didn't really go to school really because, well, he was bullied. So he failed all of his exams. He left school with nothing. At the age of 17, without really having anywhere else to go and didn't know what to do, he joined the army. In the army, the racism was actually worse, so he was not having a good time. And also, he was gay. He wasn't out at this point, but there must have been certain mannerisms or things, I don't know, but the people in the army that in his, I want to say platoon, I don't know, his army friends, those people around him in the army knew that he was gay, and they would tease him and bully him for that as well. He stayed in the army for 2 years, which is 2 years longer than I would have done. He committed his first really serious crime when he did leave the army, but didn't really think it through. He robbed his local grocery store. So they knew who he was. Do you know what I mean? He took a massive knife and he was like, oh, give me all this stuff and la la la. But the lady that worked there was like, Thierry. So she reported it to the police and he was arrested. Like, you can't just go around robbing people with a massive knife. And why would you, not even with a balaclava, and why would you do it in your local village or, town? Come on. He was given 2.5 years for that. However, I don't know what happened, but he didn't end up serving any of it. It was like a suspended thing or something, but he never served any time for it. During the time that he was in the army, his mother had moved to France. So she'd moved to Paris. At this point, Thierry lived in Toulouse with his dad. So he was in Toulouse. And when he didn't go to prison, he asked his mum if he could go and live with her. Maybe his dad was really super cross. I don't know, probably. So he asked to go and live with his mum in Paris. Him and his mother did not get on. They did not have a good relationship. They didn't get on. And so it was difficult. Everything in his life has just been difficult. And then the story for Thierry changes, and it kind of picks up a bit, because when he's 21, he starts working in a what do I want to say? Cabaret. It's a drag bar, a drag. So he starts working in a drag bar, and he loves it. He's a waiter, so he's waiting there, but he just loves it, and it makes him feel at home, and he really enjoys it. And slowly but surely, he starts to become, what would you say? He starts to partake as well. He starts dressing up, and he becomes somebody. I can't speak. Help me. He becomes part of the act, the drag act, and he loves it. He finally felt like himself. He was proud. He was enjoying it. It was a real passion, and he really liked it. Even though he had a really troubled relationship with his mother, he was so proud of his new venture, that he asked his mother to come along and watch one of his shows, and she said yes, even though she wasn't supportive of him at all, but she said she would come along. And really sadly, he was doing his show, and within seconds, his mum just got up and just left. She just left. And that's kind of like the story of his life. So anyone that should have supported him just abandoned him, really. So not great. But he continued to work there. He continued to do what he loved. If this was a film, this would just be like, oh, no. Because he's on the up, isn't he? And then, he meets somebody. So he meets a guy called Thierry Paulin, and they fall in love, and they get together, and they love each other lots. Sadly, Paulin is a drug addict, badly, heroin, cocaine, quite seriously. And it isn't long before this happens to Thierry. The pair of them would end up living this extravagant, expensive, partying, social, drug-fueled life. And they didn't earn enough money to support this at all whatsoever. They moved out as well. They moved out of Thierry's mum's house, so he moved out of there, and they moved into a luxury hotel together. So all of these things, they were sort of living beyond their means, and they were living the high life they wanted to. And it was a lot of drugs, mainly cocaine, which is expensive as well. So they had this expensive drug habit to fuel. Thierry was not shy of doing naughty things, criminal things. And so in order to fund their habit, he started to sell drugs himself. And soon that was not enough. They still didn't have enough money. And then they started to pickpocket. So they were just thieving out on the street. I've got to pick a pocket or two, boy. You got to pick a pocket or two. It can be like a big thanks. You got to pick a pocket or two. Did you enjoy it? So yes, so they started doing that together, and it seems like Thierry was the mastermind behind all of this. He was the ringleader, if you like, of all the criminal activity, whereas his boyfriend just wanted money for drugs. He was heavily addicted. He was more of hungry for it, and he just didn't care. He didn't care how they were getting it. He just wanted his drug money. Now, this doesn't go into my brain at all. This is where I'm just flabbergasted. From drug dealing to pickpocketing to murdering elderly people in their houses and stealing money. No in between. There was no pickpocketing, burgling empty houses. Pickpocketing, murdering elderly people for their money. What? That doesn't go in for me. Doesn't go in. Their little setup was that Thierry would approach elderly people in the street, and I don't know what he would say, but it would depend on how they would react to him. So if they were kind to him, nice to him, patient, whatever he deemed good, if they were like that, they were allowed to live and he would move on. If people were rude to him or ignored him, shunned him, they were to die. So he would then, if they did that, he would then follow them and scout where they lived so that they could go back later and murder and steal. Awful. This was a difficult one because Thierry would say that he would sit with the victims while Mathurin would go around the property, find things to steal, and like turn the place upside down. And also Thierry, he would sit with the victims and he would torture them. So he admitted that, but neither him or Mathurin would admit to murder. So they both said that each of it wasn't me, it was him. It wasn't me, it was him. That sort of situation, frustratingly. But whichever one of you it was, you allowed it to happen. So and they don't know who in the first wave who murdered who. After the first wave of murders, when things got hot and heavy with the police presence, Thierry would ring his dad and be like, "Oh, can I move in with you?" So back into Toulouse. And that is what happened. However, his dad did not know or was in denial that Thierry was gay. And so when Thierry turned up with Mathurin, his dad was pissed off. This caused a massive ruckus, it caused a huge argument, and Mathurin wanted to go. He wanted to leave. He wanted Thierry to leave with him and for them not to stay there and this, that and the rest of it. In the end, Mathurin and Thierry separated because Thierry wanted to stay with his dad. Thierry wanted to make something of his life. He wanted more. He wanted more than what was going on. And so he tried to set up like an agency for trans people. However, it fell flat. It fell massively flat on its face because it was Toulouse and this wasn't Paris, and it just did not work. It died a very quick death. And this was upsetting to Thierry. And so this is when he moved back to Paris, and this is when the second wave would begin. There are some thoughts around motive and things like that because predominantly all of the victims were elderly, and he had a really troubled relationship with his grandmother. She wasn't very nice at all. So they wondered whether that might have had something to do with the fact that all of the attacks were on the elderly, as well as the fact that obviously they are weaker and more vulnerable. Also, the second wave just coincided massively with his passion project failing. So could that have been a trigger for the second wave? Who knows? It seems like he was trying to better himself and do something with his life, and it all fell apart. The second wave ended because Thierry nearly killed a drug dealer. Yeah, he nearly killed him. I think he beat him very severely. So much so that this drug dealer was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna dog myself in. Like I'm a drug dealer, but can you like he nearly killed me." So he told on Thierry. So Thierry went to prison, and that is why the second wave ended. When Thierry came out of prison, he got some terrible news, and he tested positive for HIV. And this was just a blow, a devastating blow. And he knew that he was going to die. So rather than fix his life up or anything like that, he just wanted to go hard. He wanted to party, he wanted to take drugs, he wanted to just live it up for the remainder of his days. And so began the third wave. So nothing changed. When Thierry was questioned, when he was put into prison, you know, he didn't really seem to be all that bothered, and that is probably because he knew that he was going to die and that he wouldn't be spending the rest of his life in prison. So he didn't seem to be all that concerned with it. And eventually, after a few days of interrogation with the police, when he'd been arrested, he did confess. So, yeah, it was me. When he was in prison waiting for trial, like I say, he wasn't all that fussed, but he did love the attention and the publicity. He was all over that and he loved it. He loved it. He would ask like family to send in, you know, like the newspaper articles and things like that of him in the newspaper. He was like, yeah, can you send me all of those? And he collected all of the clippings of him in the newspaper. So, yeah, he fancied himself a bit. After a year in prison awaiting for trial, Thierry got unwell. He got really poorly. I think he got like pneumonia and something else. Like he got sick. And I think with HIV, doesn't your immune system break down? And it's just, so you're much more susceptible to infection. And he got very unwell. And then he did pass away. So he didn't even go to trial. He passed away on the 16th of April in 1998. Many people were sad and think that he got away lightly because he didn't go to trial, he didn't have any justice for the crimes that he'd committed, and they were awful. They did have his accomplice. They had Jean Thierry Mathurin was the word I was looking for, name. And he received a life sentence. There was no proving in the first wave. I mean, come on. In the second wave and the third wave, Thierry was on his own. So it's safe to say that he probably murdered the people in the first wave as well. However, there was no way of proving that, and they knew, and he'd confessed to being with Thierry for the murders, and that he was the one ransacking the place and robbing everybody, but there was no proof that he didn't actually murder anybody, and so he did get a life sentence. And I think that was just because even if he didn't physically murder anybody, he knew exactly what was going on, he was complicit, and he allowed it to happen. And what sort of person is that to just stand by and like witness it even? No. So he got a life sentence. And that is all I have on this case. Interesting case, crazy case, stuff and nightmares case, out of a movie, like a lot of other cases that I have covered. And my mum has gone to sleep. I always find it fascinating, the story behind the murderer. I do find it fascinating. Most of the time, you can unpick it and you can see why. It's never an excuse, but you can see these little things that all come together, or sometimes huge things, but these things that come together for them to get where they are. What I find scary as banana skins is when you don't know why, when it's just like, just someone normal, and that's frightening. I might try and find a case like that soon, actually. No, I won't, because it does scare me. So yes. Oh, any suggestions for cases, let me know, please. In the comments on Insta, do let me know, because I do like looking into those. Oh, somebody sent me one on Instagram, actually, so I'm going to look into that. I think I did start researching, but I knew I was going to do this one. So yeah, I'm going to have a look at that one over this week. Maybe that will be my next video. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. It's so nice to be back. I have missed you. I don't like missing a week. I don't. It upsets my soul. But I am glad to be back. And I'll be back next week. And the week after that. The week after that. You can't get rid of me. I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I hope you can join me next week for another true crime story and a superhero mug, or a vase, or a jug, or a bucket of gin. I'm going to have to go though because my bottom is completely numb. So numb. What's happened? Maybe I've lost a little bit of weight and like I've lost a bit of cushioning. I think that might be what's happened because I'm just super uncomfy. I don't like it. And when it gets, you know when your bum goes really dead and it feels like, will it ever come back to life? Do you get that? You know, when you get pins and needles, have you ever had pins and needles in the night time when it's not just pins and needles? It's like there is nothing. No, there's been no blood to it for like far too long, and it's odd, isn't it? That has not happened to me for ages, but I always find it like worrying, but also a bit like, oh, I don't know, almost satisfying, but really worrying. And for ages, you're like, oh my God, is it going to come back? Is it going to come back? Oh, seriously, Sophie, stop. I'm so glad I can be myself with you. Right, I'm going to love you and leave you. I need to go because I am getting more and more concerned about my bum. Okay, right, I love you all. Bye, see you next week. Bye.